This is Talk is Sheep, the official podcast of the Wild Sheep Society of BC, brought to you by Sitka Game. Come along as we bring conversations that matter to you into the high alpine.
Mr. Kyle Stelter, how's it going, buddy?
Beardless, and I do have clothes on, so that's good, but beardless and excellent, I would say.
Not leading by example and being clothesless like some of our leadership at some events. No. This is an interesting podcast. I'm excited for it. We're all seeing the Grizzly Bear Stewardship Framework sitting idle, so to speak, and you and Mr. Ellis, you hammer this topic home.
Yeah, it was good to sit down with Scott and Scott Ellis, GOABC, Guide Outfitters Association of British Columbia, Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director. And Scott is he's knowledgeable. And one thing you're going to learn is just when he starts talking about what he's involved in, the list is long, and it's just that's part of the list. Scott's got his hands in many pots, really involved, very passionate about wildlife, very knowledgeable. He's a knowledgeable guy. And it's a pleasure to always talk to Scott because I learn something every single conversation. This is no different. And we kind of dig deep on grizzly bears. Some of you have heard about the Grizzly Bear Framework. Some of you have heard about the Grizzly Bear lawsuit that has been taken upon the British Columbia government. So Scott talks about those two things. And, so anyone that hasn't filled out the framework yet, there's a lot of information that Scott will impart in this podcast that will be helpful to you. And Scott's got some really good ideas and some thoughts that will be positive for you moving forward when you're trying to complete that grizzly bear engagement survey.
Yeah, no, and, like you said, Scott's so knowledgeable when he speaks. He's one of those guys that I love just having that 5-minute conversation with anytime you see him out and about. You're always learning from him, and he's a man of many hats. That guy, great advocate.
Well, and it's interesting too. Scott. There's some organizations or groups that he's involved in that your typical hunter is not, which I think is intelligent. I think it's controversial, but he'll talk about unlikely allies on this podcast. And, people that do not support what we do. They do not support hunting. They do not support consumptive use. They do not support grizzly bear hunting. And Scott, works with these groups and, he's trying to reach across the fence. And, it's been an approach that GOABC's taken. And, I think that, it's controversial. I get it. But also, there's a lot of good work that's being done there. And we look at the Fish, Wildlife, and Habitat Coalition that the Wild Sheep Society of BC is part of. Scott's a big part of that. And there's some people on that group that we don't normally work with and normally wouldn't work with, but there's things that we can agree on, and some of them are spending money on wildlife. There's things that habitat enhancement. We don't talk about the things we disagree on. We don't talk about hunting. We don't talk about shooting grizzly bears, and that's not the conversation we want to have there. But there are things that with those groups that we do have in common, and that's what we're working towards. And these groups are getting more organized, and they're getting more. They're engaging more with the provincial government. And they're getting more respect. So, working with them is probably a good idea unless you want to be on the outside looking in. And I don't think anyone wants to be there. So.
No, and that's the thing. We all need that seat at the table, and when you have the common interest in mind, like you said, it's good. It helps get things done for certain things that we want, and you leave the hunting at home kind of deal for those tables. But yeah, it needs to be done. Stuff needs to happen. Things needs to change in this province, and sometimes you just got to think outside the box.
Yeah, and hold our province accountable. And these groups, there's groups that have very common interests, like I just mentioned, habitat, funding for wildlife. They care about those same things. So let's advocate together and let's hold the government accountable. And if we have 4 million people, 4 million British Columbians telling the government they need to do something, we got a hell of a lot better chance than 100,000, and we know that 100,000 hunters don't show up for that conversation anyway. So, let's rally the troops and get people on board for the things that at least matter to all of us and that we can have that conversation about. So,
yeah, it's a good segue to lean into our little call to action here for the get engaged and go speak your mind on the Grizzly Bear Framework, and www.wildsheepsociety.com/act now. Cheat sheets are there. Everything you need to help you sit down and make it happen and make sure you're heard. So,
on this podcast, Scott talks a lot about some of these issues, some of the concerns GOABC has, and actually Scott simplifies it. He's like, if all you're going to do is this is what you need to do, and it's not even say go kill grizzly bears. That's not the message. He's got some very simple strategies, and I agree with Scott. Like, if it's overwhelming, just keep it simple. And there's some basic tenets that we believe strongly in: science-based wildlife management. Most hunter conservationists believe in that. Funding for wildlife, those sort of things, pretty simple. So, but at the very least, just do the bloody survey, and Scott will give you some tips and tricks that will help you with that survey. And like Greg said, there's cheat sheets out there. Wild Sheep BC has one, obviously BCWF, and there's a number of organizations that can give you some tips on how to do that. So
yeah, no, it's good, and make sure you get it done. So we got something else still in the works right now too. Jurassic Classic, we dropped one heck of a rifle package for the Sacco Steiner combination, and is it one of the first, or it's got to be one of the first Sacco 90 adventures in Canada?
Yeah, I think when it got shipped to us, it was the first. It was certainly top of the heap. And so, first of all, the Jurassic Classic, a lot of you guys know what that is, and GOABC, and that's kind of why we're talking about tonight, is involved with the Jurassic, and we partner on that program. Great event, and through the Jurassic this year, in fact, every year, either Tika or Sacco stepped up and donated a rifle, and Steiner the optics, and we put together this amazing package. So this is it's a Sacco Adventure 90, it's called, and beautiful rifle. We all know what the Sacco and Tika actions are like, and it's like butter. It's a 6.5 Creedmoor. It's a perfect sheep gun. Scope's a little on the heavy side, but you're still got a really light sheep gun, and perfect caliber for sheep hunting. So if you're thinking about, you want to upgrade, this is a good one to get some tickets on. We're selling tickets on this until November 4th. So you're going to support our conservation efforts. You're going to support wild sheep, and you get a chance to win a kick-ass rifle from Sacco and Steiner.
Yeah, that Steiner Predator 4 rifle scope, it's a 2.5 by 10 by 42 mil illuminated E3 reticle. It's a nice scope for getting out there and making things happen and connecting the dots. And then that rifle too, I don't know if you want to say a piece of art, but it's beautiful. With carbon fiber stock and the adjustable cheek piece, the Cerakoted stainless steel barrel, like it's a beautiful piece of equipment to add to your list for going into the backcountry.
Yeah, Sacco completely, basically redesigned their whole lineup there, and it's still got the greatness of Sacco, but they've kind of upgraded everything, and there's a bunch of really cool features on that, and too many to mention. But head over again to the website, and there's a bunch of features listed there, and I think this is the first one that's available at raffle in Canada. So. Again, super grateful to Sacco and Steiner for stepping up, and they've been supporting the Jurassic for years now, and this is a really important part of our funding model for that event.
Beautiful. Make sure you guys go to our website, buy a ticket. Good luck. That draws is November 4th.
You betcha.
And you'll be drawing that at a patio in a pub somewhere, or maybe indoors at that time of year.
Yeah, Moon Underwater Pub, on Bridge Street in Victoria here. We drew the 6-gun raffle last weekend, and that was a blast. It was a super fun time. And we didn't even plan a pub night. We just did the draw. We had about a dozen people show up. Like, what's the pub night? We're like, well, we're just drawing the rifle, but we had some beers and had a good time and lots of laughs. And so we'll put something together November 4th. So there'll be more out on that in the next couple of weeks here. So
awesome. Looking forward to it. I think that's a good time to roll into this next one with Scott Ellis. What's this, episode 151? We're on a roll.
Absolutely, 151. You betcha.
This episode is sponsored by our conservation partner, Gunworks. Thank you, Sitka Gear and Gunworks, for investing in healthy wildlife and sustainable ecosystems.
Pretty cool day for me today. I get to chat with the one and only Mr. Scott Ellis. We've got the Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director of the Guide Outfitters Association of British Columbia. Scott, always a pleasure to talk to you. We get to do this a lot over a computer screen, and every once in a while we get to do it face-to-face. It's good to see you.
Good to be here. Thanks. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, we've been talking about this for, honestly, literally months/years. And, it was kind of, and we talked about it drastic, and we're like, okay, we need to connect on, and in particular on Grizzly Bears. There's a few things. Obviously, there's this framework that's going on right now that a lot of our listeners know about. And the one thing that I'd like to learn a little bit more about is what's going on with the class action lawsuit a little bit too. But before we jump into all that cool stuff, who the hell is Scott Ellis and what do you do?
Well, thanks, Kyle. I guess a little snapshot into my mind, and sorry to hopefully not bore everybody, but so executive director and CEO for the Guide Outfitters Association, as you said. I sit on the Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation. So money that we raise from the special sheep permit go through there. A lot of the money raised from hunters and anglers go to sheep conservation and wildlife conservation and restoration in the province. Co-chair of the Venture Tourism Coalition. So anything to do with adventure tourism in the backcountry. Got good friends that, represent even, bear viewing. So that might be a bit of a stretch. Partner in, or part team of, on the Unlikely Allies that normally raises a few eyebrows. And vice chair of the Canadian Federation of Outfitter Association. So I guess all that to say I'm all in. And I've been here, 15 or 16 years, and it's time flies, and love talking about wildlife, love talking about sheep conservation, and just a little, that's kind of what I do.
So most importantly though, Scott, do you hunt?
So my first exposure to hunting was traumatic. I was 5 years old. My mom picked me up from school, and I had just been playing in one of those kiddie pools. I don't know if you've seen them, or I'm sure they're still around today. They're the plastic ones. They're blue, and mine was blue and white at least, and had the dolphins and the whales in it, and there was a little slide, and I don't know, they're about 6 inches deep, right? And so we came driving in the driveway. My dad's got this buck hanging in the garage, and what's catching all the blood so it doesn't go on the ground? My kiddie pool. Oh my goodness, I was, fit to be tied and not that happy, and mostly concerned about my kiddie pool. Didn't realize, didn't think too much of the buck that was my dad was all proud of. And so after my mom gave my dad what for, and I calmed down a little bit, and Dad told me I was getting a new pool. We're all good. He started showing me, anatomy of deer, and, talking about, blacktails. This was in Courtney, and it was kind of the exposure to hunting. And, I've just been hunting all my life. And my brothers hunt, my sister hunts, my stepmom hunts. It's just, wired in the DNA.
So you run the show for the Guide Outfitters, and you guys do a ton of great work in the province here. But my understanding is last fall you maybe even were doing some guiding on your own, or what's the deal there?
So my daughter graduated from, my youngest daughter just graduated from UVic in business, and the business has a co-op program. And like I say, about 15 years ago when I was hired, they said, well, we're going to put you through a training program, and you'll get to see some outfitter camps and lodges, and maybe, do a little guiding, or at least understand how the family business is run. And I said, sure, fantastic. And that never happened. And then last year, I started talking to my board about this co-op program my daughter was on and how great it was and how this was a promise that was made to me, more than a decade ago. And they said, well, why don't we make that happen? So I've successfully guided a couple of black bears, a couple of archery moose, might be doing another moose guided trip. So yeah, having a little bit of fun, trying to get a little street cred with my community.
Cool. Well, it might be in the hot seat if you end up giving your day job to go guiding and they have to replace the exec director, the CEO. They wouldn't like that very much, would they? Goodness. Awesome. So, Scott, talk a little bit about what's happening with the guide outfitting industry. I know that COVID for everybody was a train wreck, and for the outfitting industry, it was a tough time. How are things looking these days, and how's everything on the horizon?
Yeah, man, I never want to hear the words COVID again. Hopefully, we learned a lot from that, but the border closures were really tough on the outfitting community. Most of the people that use an outfitter come from the United States, and it's about 5,000 a year come to British Columbia to hunt big game. And we're back to those numbers again. So really happy that, we've rebounded. Our American friends see that, we've got, great sheep, we've got great wildlife, safe, they get good value for money with the exchange, easy to get here. So it's been a really good recovery. That was a painful time, and hope we never get back there.
Right on. I'm glad to hear that things are looking up, and I see a lot more smiling outfitters than I did 2 years ago. And I had a lot of empathy. I know we all did for what you guys went through as an organization, and just glad to see that most groups and most outfits survived COVID, which was great to see. And you guys are a real tight-knit group. You guys look out after each other too, so it's really good to see that we're on the backside of that. So. Yeah,
we really are a family community, right? So the folks that are members of GOABC typically, I know the family. I know how long they've been in business, whether that's multiple generations or just started. I know their kids. I know what their issues are. At least I try to. We lost one, through COVID, which I think is a testament. You think about where you would be if you had 1 year no income. I could tell you where I'd be.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take, Scott, I've always listened to a number of your podcasts, and Don Willimon had a great one, and you were on there, and you guys talked about a lot of real cool issues, and I've heard a number over the years that you've done, and always appreciate your perspective. And you have a very unique perspective leading, British Columbia's guide outfitters. Grizzly Bears, very topical now with this engagement stuff. We've got the lawsuit. Let's just dive into that and just kind of, I guess maybe let's start off with the engagement and why people should be involved and kind of what the guide outfitting industry and GOABC's perspective is on it. Yeah,
you bet, Kyle. No, I appreciate that. It is something that I think it's critical. I think that, whether you're from Greater Vancouver or rural Vancouver or Canada or the United States, please take a few minutes, take 15 minutes, read a little bit on the Grizzly Bear Stewardship Framework, and complete the survey. The Antis are doing it. They're hosting roundtables. They're, bringing in First Nations and trying to, further their campaign to solidify that the hunt stays closed. The Grizzly Bear Foundation, is doing a bunch of work and trying to raise a bunch of money in that regard, and that's their right to do so. I think that as hunters, as those folks that just think that government will make the right decision and conservation matters and science matters, sometimes it doesn't. And politics is involved in hunting, whether we like it or not. It doesn't matter whether you hunt sheep or you don't hunt sheep, or you're hunting in Africa or you're hunting in British Columbia. And I think that even you're a domestic American hunter that hunts, in Montana or wherever, or whitetails in Pennsylvania, you've got issues that you never had before. And the language is all the same. So you can replace, grizzly bear with lion or black bear, or hunting with dogs, or et cetera, et cetera. The rhetoric's the same. And so I think that, my, call to action here for hunters is engage. This is an opportunity to engage in the Grizzly Bear Stewardship Framework. When the grizzly bear hunt was under pressure, we did not engage as a community. The responses from the resident hunters in British Columbia, from the outfitting community, from our partners, from organizations across Canada and the U.S., it was not enough. And let's learn from that. Let's engage, and where you have an opportunity, talk to your elected official. I mean, I'm specifically talking about urban MLAs. So you're a member of a legislative assembly here in British Columbia. And for your listeners that are from Vancouver and what I call the Golden Triangle, it's even more important. The Golden Triangle is typically NDP ground. But if you look at the map, the kind of the blue-red map, it is exactly the same throughout the United States. It's the same across Canada generally. And so in BC, we've got about 1.4 million people in Vancouver. We've got another about 1.4 million people in, the Victoria, Greater Vancouver area, and that's what I call a Golden Triangle. And then we got about 1.4 million people throughout the rest of British Columbia. So, this message is kind of an urban-rural message, but engage. In the U.S., they have senators and governors. Here, what's most important, because wildlife is managed provincially mostly, is talk to your MLA. And if you're in one of those urban ridings, go talk to them about what's important to you. Go talk to your NDP MLA about wildlife. Go talk to them about what wildlife needs. And that's how we move the needle.
It's interesting. When this all came out, I've been telling people, go see your MLA. I'm like, I better go see my MLA, which I do pretty regularly anyway. And it was really tough during COVID. She just wouldn't see us. But I had a few conversations with her, and she actually is a minister. I think she's, I can't remember what her portfolio is exactly, but I just popped by the office. I thought, you know what? I never get anywhere when I call or email. I walk in, and she was in the office by herself. She was in her stocking feet, and she came to the door, and I said, "Oh, can I speak to Grace Lohr, who's my MLA?" And she's like, "That's me." I'm like, "Oh, wow, okay." So, and she's like, "Yeah, come on in." So we sat down. I got 40 minutes with her, and I just hammered her on the grizzly bear stuff. And she was taking notes, and she said, she goes, "I'm going to take this to the Minister of Environment." I'm like, "Well, that's fine. You can do that, but Force is who we really want to hammer." And she took detailed notes. She's dyed-in-the-wool NDP as they get, and was super engaging, and she was insistent that she'd report back to me on her dialogue with the minister's office. And I have to say, I was incredibly impressed. And I can't imagine what it'd be like if there was 30 of us doing that. And she did say that the other aisle was in there, that she did have people in there that were sort of speaking, against the hunt and sort of, the opposite narrative that maybe, from a similar place, I guess, but opposite narrative. And she was super great to engage on. Did that piece of paper go in the garbage? She certainly made me feel like, she was listening. And she, even at the end of it, she reiterated what we've been talking about. And I was blown away by, her level of comprehension of what I'd raised to her. And I can guarantee it wasn't the narrative that she normally was hearing too. So, yeah, I think it works, Scott. And, even in these urban ridings, people, if they hear enough of that, they're going to listen a little bit. So
yeah, and I mean, that's kudos to you, Kyle. I think it's really, really important. The last time I was in to see my MLA, and I knew him before he was an MLA, he said, "Scott, no offense, your shit doesn't matter here. It's not to do with $10 a day daycare. It's not to do with safe supply. It's not to do with the basically the platform before us. Those are not our issues. We're worried about healthcare and education, and goes on his kind of rant. And I'm like, clean air, clean water, so we have healthy habitats for wildlife should be important to you. Shouldn't wait until there's a flood or wildfire for you guys to pay attention, right? I said, I basically told him that's BS. And I said, you should be looking at wildlife and specifically hunting. And I say this all the time. You want an indication of healthy habitats? Have a marker. My marker, or I call them KPI, so key performance indicator, is a hunt. So you have a healthy population of sheep, or you have a healthy grizzly bear population if there's a hunt. Because in this day and age, generally, based on science, very conservative, well measured. We know what the harvest is. We know what the effort is. We put that money back into conservation. Like it's all good things. Like I tell my green folks that if there's a hunt, they should be happy. They're not, but they should be, because of just that there's abundant wildlife if there's a hunt. Because if there isn't abundant wildlife, there isn't. The only asterisk there would be grizzly bears.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When someone goes in to see their MLA, and let's say, somebody's a little intimidated by it all, and, we're advocating for the hunt. When I walked in, I didn't sit there and say, oh, we want the hunt back. Obviously, it was intertwined with a whole bunch of stuff. What kind of narrative do they need to have? What do we need to focus on in that narrative with your MLA about what's the correct tone that's going to get some buy-in, as opposed to, well, we need the hunt back because we like to kill grizzly bears. What's the best approach there, Scott?
I probably wouldn't start with, slamming the, fist on the table saying we need to hunt grizzly bears. That's probably not their best message, but these are people too, right? And they're in your community. I was talking to my dad just yesterday. We're having a problem with a different matter. And he said, well, I'm just going to go see the mayor. And I'm like, oh, good for you, right? He said, yeah, you're rubbing off on me. I'm headed to see the mayor. And I'm like, all right, well, how are you going to get an appointment to see him? I said, sometimes it's tough getting into the mayor's office. He said, well, I'm not going to see the mayor in his office. I'm headed to, Associate Tire. It's like, that's what he owns. That's where he is. That's where I buy my tires. I've known him for, 25 years. So in all these communities, you have an MLA. You're going to have issues that are important to you in your riding. Just talk to them about those things. And I think that you can say, look, wildlife is important to us. Funding for wildlife is important to us. Just talk about your story. You don't have to be an expert on sheep. You don't have to be an expert on grizzly bears. But you can say, managing wildlife is important, and, using good science is important. And if you take a species, out of the equation, it's really tough to have a balance, and just have a rational conversation about wildlife, and then find your way to talk about grizzly bears if you want to. And then if you don't, that's okay too. You can just talk about sheep if you want, but get that on their radar, because otherwise, if they're only thinking about whatever, $10 daycare or safe supply, or someone that got stabbed the other day because it's catch and release, and I always thought that was fishing, but now it's something to do with how we handle our criminals. They have a bunch of other distractions. And so I guess my thing would be just have them put a face to the name so they know who Kyle Stelter is. And he's like, oh yeah, no, he's not some fat, bald, drunk, toothless hunter. He's actually articulate, nice, reasonable person who's in my constituency and actually can articulate a sentence. It's like, like change the stereotype of what a hunter is. Show that you care. And I think if you show that you care, you've moved the needle.
Cool. Good advice. Okay, let's dig in a little bit on the Grizzly Bear Stewardship Framework. So for those that haven't completed, there's obviously the engagement form. It takes 15 to 30 minutes. You could probably do it in 10 if you were doing a poor job, and I know people take 30 minutes. It's not overly onerous. It's just a matter of ticking some boxes, and there's some comments to write. I know that you have shared with your membership some thoughts on some ideas, just to share some concepts. We've done the same. Let's talk about some of the things that you don't like about that. And sure, let's just talk about the framework. What do you like about it? What don't you like about it?
What I don't like about it, I would like more opportunity to put more comments in. And so GOABC also wrote a letter as well as a reply to the questionnaire, because lots of the questionnaire questions, they're very specific. You pick whatever those buttons are called, and that's it. There's not a lot of comments. There's a few comments depending on what you say. So, it would have been a little bit better, I think, if you had more space to talk about science or conservation, though I think those would be really good, some principal foundation pieces, and a little bit more about hunting. I think if they talked a little bit more about the hunt, I think that would be better. There's enough in there, though, that it's got the anti-hunting community all riled up. So there are some things in there which I do appreciate. And then, like in any questionnaire, it's what's that saying? Something about figures lie and liars figure or something. I forget exactly what it is, but I mean, you can make those the survey data that come out of those questionnaires almost say whatever you want to. But I think if you take the time to read a little bit about grizzly bear stewardship, I think that there are some good text in there. There is some good information there about grizzly bears. So that part I like. Questionnaire could be better. And the biggest thing is they're counting. And so they count how many people engage. And they don't seem to filter out based on IP address or physical address. Initially, we watched that closely, and we thought that the province screened that out. And so we didn't push it too much to some of our partners. But it seems that they don't seem to pay too much attention to that. So, I know Wild Sheep Society's pushed it out. I know Wild Sheep Foundation has pushed that out. That's fantastic. We've asked Dallas to do it as well, SCI to do it as well, and then CFOA across Canada, and then APOS specifically because they're close and they've got lots of grizzly bears. So, I think that engagement counts. And I think that, you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be a PhD on grizzly bears. Just, go through, fill out the questionnaire, take the time to do it. It's worth the 30 minutes.
Well, and there's nothing to indicate that of who you are or whatever. So there could be multiple inputs, right? So you could have, somebody doing the same survey day in and day out and skew the data as well. So It's not a perfect science either. And you kind of wonder, on that 2017 survey that was done in, I guess, October or whatever it was, where did that information, how skewed was that as well, right? So it's...
and that's one thing about those, and I don't remember the name, but I guess there's a type of web browser, and this is not my area of expertise, but incognito or something, and you can put that on, and then you don't know who you are. And so it was actually one of my kids came to me and said, "Hey, Dad," and I have no idea how this came up, probably because they're just my kids and I talk about wildlife all the time. Samantha comes to me and she says, "Hey, look, did you know that, we'll just say, leave the name of the organization out for the moment. They're telling their members to go and use the web browser incognito so they don't get blocked. And they're having people," and I'm, whatever, they're volunteers or paid or not, I don't know, go in and fill out the survey over and over and over again. Because if you go in through the regular IP address, you can only do it one time. But if you go through incognito, you can do as many times as you want. So you have these survey results that there's workarounds. And so specifically for the Grizzly Bear Stewardship Framework, at the end, you don't have to say if you're a guide or an outfitter or anti-hunter or member of government or whatever, that you can fill that out or not fill that out. There's no. I think we could do a lot better on screening that stuff, but since they don't, and I can tell you that the anti-hunting groups are marketing it to their friends in California. we need to send it to our friends in the U.S. as well.
Yeah, well said. What do you think about? So it's interesting in the framework they do reference hunting actually, and they don't really talk against that. They're factual about it. They talk about sort of, and it's interesting. I think it's in there. It might have been the Governor General's report or the Attorney General's report, but I believe it was. There was they did say in there that hunting was never a cause for population declines that were a conservation concern, I think is how they worded it. I think that was in the framework. So I thought I can see why the anti-hunting community is a little worked up, because it certainly wasn't slamming hunting.
No, it isn't. It's not their, it's not the rhetoric they use. So, that's why they're rattling the sabers and doing their campaigns as best they can. And you're 100% right. It's the Auditor General's report that says the number one threat to grizzly bears in the province of British Columbia is habitat loss. And what are we doing about habitat loss? Nothing. So they're worried about the 300 bears a year that are harvested by hunters? Like, come on. Right? We have grizzly bears on Vancouver Island. Best estimates, we've got somewhere around 20. The COs have killed several, so that gives you an idea that there's a problem, because they're in communities like Kelsey Bay and Bellacoola, anyways, north end of the island, and it'll raise people's eyebrows when they get south of the Malahat, and there will be a time when they get there, right? So we have grizzly bears in Squamish, we have them in the Harrison. We have them in Manning Park. So folks that don't know the geography they're from British Columbia, the grizzly bear habitat density is increasing, their range is increasing, and they're getting closer and closer to that 2.8 million folks that live in the Golden Triangle. And when there's more and more incidents in human conflict, in Squamish and Harrison, and maybe one day on the Malahat, then maybe more people will pay attention.
One of my buddies, I won't identify him because people on this podcast know who he is, but he always talks, we need to drop a dozen of them off in Stanley Park and see how the sort of the tree huggers, he calls them, would react to that if they're still think we shouldn't kill grizzly bears. But that may be a bit extreme, but
well, I mean, yeah. I don't know. We want to go down the rabbit hole of the 12 coyotes in Stanley Park that that they trap, and what an outrage that has been. But yeah, when it's not in your backyard, right? It's not that big of a deal, right? So in White Rock, where I live, yeah, we don't have any grizzly bears, and so. But I talk to people every day that in northern British Columbia or Kootenays, it doesn't matter, and they have cabins trashed, like absolutely, like they go in through the floor and out through a wall, like that's the end of the cabin, and it looks worse than a hurricane went through. It's like, well, what do we do about that? Well, you build another cabin.
So I was talking to one of your outfitters. Actually, he's part of the association. He called a couple of weeks ago. We were chatting. And he that's exactly what happened. He had a grizzly bear destroy his cabin overnight, and he was flying in to fix it. So, anecdotally, what are you hearing from your community, the guiding community, relating to grizzly bears on the landscape and what kind of numbers they're having? There was kind of like this fear-mongering thing in 2017. Oh, there's going to be all these problems, and we know they've increased. But how bad is it, Scott?
So I want to be real careful here, right? When you think about, and I think the number is significantly higher than 15,000. But that's government's number. And if we think that we take out hunting, the mortality is 300 a year. It's like, it's not going to be an explosion of grizzly bears. But over time, you start thinking about that. If the number was low, which I believe it was at 15,000, and you add 300 a year, that's something. And then you add it to what we knew already. So Bruce McClellan is, I think, the smartest and brightest large carnivore expert the province has ever had, and done decades and decades of work on grizzly bears in the Flathead. And it's his reports that are pointing to the density of grizzly bears and their range expanding, we're going to get more and more grizzly bears. So we're going to have more and more problems in the backcountry. And so there's going to be more and more sheep hunters that are going to bump into grizzly bears. There's going to be more and more folks that are out hunting and pull the trigger and have a grizzly bear coming to the dinner bell. Those are things that are going to be happening. That will be a learned behavior by bears, and they will happen. And if you have, if there's more bears, and we are seeing more bears, let's be clear about that. We're seeing sows with, 2 and 3 cubs, and so. What does that mean? That'll be impacts to ungulates, especially calves. That'll be impacts to black bears. You're going to see displacement of black bears. And you're going to see them in places you never saw them before. And we're seeing all those things. So there's a lot. It's not to do with the number of bears. There is a lot of bears, and there's more and more bears. The exact number, Kyle, I'm not sure. I'd rather not guess, but it's significantly higher than the old number that the province had of 15,000.
Mm-hmm. And what is the anti-community usually? Something like 6 to 8 or something is a number I see quite frequently, right? So yeah. As
standard operating procedure for them, right? Argue the science and say there's only 6,000 bears. It's like, really? And then, if you looked through some of the grizzly bear work, you'll see that most of the populations, so they break it up into, I think, 55 grizzly bear population units throughout the province. So you take almost 1 million square kilometers, and you divide that into 55 population units, and then most of those, I believe, are done by model. So, what do they say? There's another saying about models. It's not coming to me either, but it's something that all models are wrong, but all models may be helpful depending on what you put in them. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is we really don't know how many grizzly bears are out there, but there's a lot, and there's a lot more than 15,000. And I would say anyone that says that there's something like 6 has never been in rural British Columbia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Somebody asked me if I seen any bears on my tat hunt this year. There was 7 bears we've seen in a week or something like that. 7 different ones. Okay.
Lots of those stories, right? I mean, I have people that, have told me that, they're going moose hunting and they see more grizzly bears than moose. How do I document that, or how do I put that into, some kind of citizen science and send it to the province, who says, unless you're a biologist that works for the province, your voice doesn't count? I would love to see not only incorporation of indigenous knowledges, which is coming or here now, but also, something around the local knowledge or citizen science, so that they would be able to quantify the number of grizzly bears or sheep that we see. Find what are the criteria for you to accept what we see into your information, so that we know how many bears, sheep, whatever are on the ground.
Well, and I think that's a big takeaway for me as I look at, I've gotten more involved in the conservation side of things, and talking to guide outfitters that are on the landscape day in and day out. They understand it. They've seen it. They've seen these shifts over time. And, we talk about local knowledge. Of course, First Nations, that's valuable data. But the guide outfitting community, come on, to me, like, you got to get a guide outfit that lives in his or her traditional guiding area, or their lease area, and they've got all this data and all this information, and the government doesn't even really pay attention to it. It's insane.
Yeah, they throw it out as biased.
Yeah, it's crazy. Okay, let's talk a little bit about science, Scott. At Jurassic, you talked about a little bit about what if science wasn't a thing? What if, and we've seen that in that document. That's one thing that bugged me about this framework document, is there's a lot of reference to social license and sort of, why they canceled the hunt, and, things based on emotion and ethics and all this stuff. What's your take on all that stuff? Not a loaded question.
How long do you want me to talk for?
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, I guess. I I guess the biggest thing to get across to people that are wired like us, Kyle, and that think that I think we do great work. I think GOABC does great work. I think the Wild Sheep Society of BC does great work, great conservation efforts. The Jurassic raises money for great conservation work. So we're doing prescribed fire, we're doing rehabilitation projects, we're doing transplants. All the different work that's been done. It's all good, and people that care get involved and they volunteer, and on and on and on, and we all know that stuff. But the anti-hunters basically say that doesn't matter. Yeah, you just do that shit so you can kill more stuff, which has some truth to it. And so I think we have to own that. And so I like to poke and prod our community a little bit. I think that science is on our side. I think history is on our side. I think the North American model is fantastic. I think the North American model, has recovered many game species to where they are today, and that should be shouted from the rooftops. But the anti-hunting community takes shots at that. The funding model in the U.S. obviously is different than the funding model in Canada for conservation, but it would be great if we had more money come from users like hunters and others in Canada. So, back to your question, hunting, we kill stuff, and I really think we need to own that a little bit. And there's folks that don't like that and they don't accept that, and so I think that we just need to be a little smarter, and then we need to talk outside our community. One Campfire is a great example of that. Who Cares is another great example of that. That's our program. I think that we need to talk to those that don't hunt. I think we need to talk to that, in BC specifically, that 2.8 million in the Golden Triangle. I think that politics is involved in hunting, and whether you hunt in your own community or you travel to hunt or you travel internationally to hunt, there's restrictions on how you bring your trophies home, whether or not you should use the word trophy or not. You can't argue the money that's raised, but the anti-hunting community is going after that as well. They don't want the North American model to happen. They don't want auctions to happen. They don't want governor's tags or premier's permits. They don't want any of those things. They want to undermine what we do, and so I think we need to be smart about that. I think we need to think about being more political. I think because what we saw with grizzly bears is science didn't matter. And so, we as conservation organizations, that's a foundational piece. That's what we build everything on. That's what we talk about this is like the holy grail is science. Science drives conservation. So at the Jurassic, I was, trying to be a little provocative there and think about what if science doesn't matter? What if conservation doesn't matter? What if all the work that we do does not matter? What if your local politician is going to say, yeah, we're not going to hunt that? And I think I've said it before, there's more grizzly bears than sheep in British Columbia. So for sheep hunters, you should say, holy shit. And so, I think people should think about that. There's a, incredibly smart group of hunters. I think we need to be motivated, and I think that the game's changing. So that comes back to what we were talking about earlier. If it's being more political, know who your mayor is, know who your MLA is, have a relationship from them. I now know where I'm buying my next set of tires, right? I'm going to continue to go back into my MLA and sit at Laura's Coffee with them and say, this stuff does matter. The floods in Chilliwack that happened a couple of years ago, partly because of our forest practices. You should pay attention to that. We have a First Nations community in our backyard, Semiahmoo First Nations. They are demanding some things. They are saying some stuff. This stuff now matters to urban ridings. It should matter. Okay, maybe we don't have grizzly bears or sheep in White Rock, but the bigger context of healthy habitats and flooding and wildfire, we've come through the worst wildfire season on record. I think there's a bunch of reasons for that. Sure, you can point to climate change, and sure, you can point to a bunch of different things, but this province has always burned. And so, we've been really good at forest or wildfire suppression to protect forest interests. And we've, really done nothing for prescribed fire. And we've not done enough to protect communities. And I think there's a bunch of things we could do better so that when fires burn, they don't burn so big and so hot and out of control, and they're devastating. So I think we need to change some things. And I think that people, your MLA, your governor, your senator, will pay a lot more attention when you've got, when it affects them, when it's in their backyard. And so if they don't quite get it yet, let's bring it to them. Let's talk about wildlife, right? Let's talk about how important it is that we have good habitats and good forest practices so we have less forest fires. Yeah, they're started by a lightning, but forest practices have a piece. Same as with the flooding, right? So I think that we can look to these things. Some of them we can control. Let's try to control them. The ones we can't, yeah, that's okay. We can't. But I think the key message here is that we've kind of been beaten to the political game, and I think that it'll do us well if the hunting community talks to their local public official.
100%, Scott. However, I'm going to throw this back at you. So we look back to, actually, before I go there, when I sit down with my friends in Victoria, and I've got friends that are not hunters. In fact, I've got some really close family friends that are, the wife is a vegan. My next door neighbor, he's a vegan. And both of them have said to me that I've got more in common with you than everyone that goes to the grocery store. They support what I do. They don't support, they won't do what I do because they don't believe in it. They don't want to kill anything. They don't want to harm anything. They understand the narrative behind it. And they said if they weren't vegan and they had to source their own food, they were sourcing meat, they would want to source it the way I do it. Although I'm a shitty hunter and hadn't killed anything for years. So that's a bad example. But that said, it was interesting. So when I talk to my neighbors and my friends, and I give my neighbors wild meat, if I'm lucky to have some, they're all for it. They love it. I've never had a bad interaction. I've had a few that are not amazing, but never anything where it was bad. On top of it, when we look at 2017, there was the survey that was done, that was the engagement that was done around grizzly bears. Less than 5,000 responses, they said. So not an incredibly emotive issue when you think about it. We got 4 million plus people in BC and 5,000 responses. 1,000 were for the hunt. I think 3,300 were against it. So we look at these numbers and we say, well, how the hell are we getting beat at our game? Because the numbers don't support it. Really, the general public, they're apathetic. They don't really give a shit, honestly. I talk to my buddies. They're like, why do you kill grizzly bears? I don't get it, but I don't really care, to be honest with you. So how the hell are we getting our asses handed to us time and time again when it's not really a wedge issue? It's not really that big a deal. But here we're losing it over 3,300 votes that probably half of them came from outside the province.
Yeah, fair comment. And so if you look to that time, the BC Liberals, so for our American friends, the Republican Party were running the province, and the NDP was looking for a wedge issue. And the NDP constituency has a green segment to it. And so they were scared to death of the Green Party. And I'm no political expert, but this is my, view of the world. So sorry, you put me on the podcast. They were worried about the orange is the color of our NDP, so New Democratic Party, that think a lot like American Democrats. Okay, so what happens if we lose a few seats? I mean, that was a dead heat. It doesn't get any closer. And so the premier, he actually very charismatic, very smart man. He wanted to hold that group from sliding. He couldn't, 3,300 votes in the wrong riding, if they were BC folks, that was enough to tip the scale. We were down to one seat. One made the difference between who won the party, or pardon me, who won the election. And so there was a Green NDP coalition, and it was the mandate of the NDP and the Green to close the hunt, and so they did it. Do people care, to be honest? I would agree. The golden triangle, or the 70% in the middle, whatever you call them, they don't care. Really? I don't really want to see people, killing grizzly bears and have them slide down a snowy slope with blood all over the place. No, I don't want to see that. That pisses me off, right? Yeah, I get that. 100%. And that's so I touched on earlier about we didn't do anything. We didn't engage. There's 100,000 resident hunters in here. So me and 999 others. That's it. That's not enough. That didn't move the needle. And you would think that, 3,300 out of, you're right, 4.5 million, that's not enough, but it was. But it was because it was the people they were worried about losing going to the Greens. And so if you start thinking about, I don't know how many hunters are in the US, but if we've got 110,000 in BC, if we all went into our MLA, specifically the ones in, urban ridings, and talked to them about wildlife, just what's important to you, how important it is for you to take your holidays and your family, and just talk to them as a normal person, and that, we run into more grizzly bears, probably should be a hunt. It's a little bit dangerous out there. That's it. That's no magic, right? That would, I think, that's the game we need to play, and we are not playing it well enough.
Yeah, well said, Scott. And I guess for those listeners that haven't filled out the engagement yet, the takeaway for me is that you don't have to be a grizzly bear hunter. And the one thing about that framework is it's really heavy on emotion and not heavy on the science. There's no objectives. They're not managing to, funding levels or population numbers, any of that stuff. And so just start weighing in and articulating about science-based wildlife management. That would be a great start. That's a one takeaway for me. And I don't have to be a grizzly bear expert to know that using the science and biology and biologists and the scientific community to make some of these decisions instead of the polling stations to make these decisions is a good start.
100%. Totally agree.
All right. Anything else on the engagement? Anything else you want to talk about or bring up or thoughts on that?
No, it just, what's your slogan here? Talk is sheep. Action matters. So, take the 15 to 30 minutes and please fill it out. And if you have a tone to it that you support hunting, it'll come through. You ask for science-based wildlife management, that'd be fantastic. That's all you need to do, right? And there's going to be more of this coming in the future. So, that is the game that we're in, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, well said. Okay, we're on the subject of grizzly bears, and I know that you guys have, and I want to thank GOABC, and actually it's not GOABC particularly, really, it's two individuals, I think, that are sort of heading up the class action lawsuit. So let's talk a little bit about where we sit with the grizzly bear class action lawsuit. I have to say it made me happy. Ron Fleming was quoted in the Vancouver Sun about 3 weeks ago, and nothing makes me happier when I see shit like that. I texted Brenda right away. I'm like, Brenda, this makes me so happy seeing Ron quoted in the Vancouver Sun. And but anyway, let's hear what's going on with the lawsuit and what's happening on the grizzly bear front.
Yeah, I guess the first thing I'm going to say is is it a marathon, not a sprint. So, Ron Fleming is lead plaintiff against the province. that was filed in about a year after the hunt closed, so late 2018. I think that the pandemic had a role in that, but it is a slow and long and painful process. We have not hid the fact that GOABC is 100% behind this. We have updates on GOABC.org on our website. We've told the province, and because I think they were trying to starve Ron actually initially, have large lawyer bills and have it take 10 years to happen, and we wanted them to know that that GOABC is underwriting this, and GOABC's got friends and partners that are going to help us, and we are going to fight this to the end. So we received certification on March the 1st. So the big deal. So it has basic merit. The judge says it has basic merit and designated what a class was. So a class is basically an outfitter that had quota in 2017 at the time of the closure. I want to be really clear here. Resident hunters cannot sue. There's no damages. And winning at trial does not reopen the hunt, right? So we're suing for damages. We're trying to send a message that if you cross the line, someone's going to hold you to account. This is cost a lot of money, so these things are not taken lightly. But I think that when a line's crossed, you have to stand up for what you believe in, and we're standing up for good government policy, good government decisions, and when they make emotional decisions, we think that we're going to hold them to account for that, and we'll see whether or not the judge agrees. But we hope the trial will be sooner than later, but it's likely it's going to be late 2024 or 2025.
So this whole thing started pre-COVID. It's gone through the process, and the big thing was to get certified. I guess that's the important part, and huge. That means that the government they're on the lam some way or the other. No matter what, there's a responsibility. Whereas if it wasn't certified before, it just kind of goes away, I guess.
Correct.
Okay. So now, and then we just play the process out here now. So whatever, the government might choose to settle. They might go to court. They might whatever. But it's just a long game to see what it's kind of. Worst case scenario, this goes to court and the judge will rule, and there'll be probably some sort of compensation, I guess.
Yeah. And so they play with house money, right? So it's the public's money. So there's no, it's not like a company that would do some kind of, risk assessment and feasibility and say, we need to settle or do this or do that. I don't know what the province will do. That's up to them and their think tank. I just know that there's a lot of resolve within and I don't know exactly the number. We don't have it yet, but I would believe that there's somewhere close to 80 to 90 outfitters that are going to be in the class. And there's a lot of determined people.
So when we look at something like this, we look at an outfitter that had numerous tags over the years, and I think some of these outfitters, they basically that was their job, their livelihood. They probably had a few bear tags or black bear tags, but that was kind of their bread and butter. Mm-hmm. What kind of losses are we talking for some of these outfitters?
We lost more to the grizzly bear closure than we lost to COVID.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Amazing.
So exactly what the magnitude is of the value of the hunt per se, I don't know. It would be in that 30 to 50 million. And then depending on who you are and where you are, and as you say, how much quota you had, the folks that had, one grizzly bear a year, so if you lose 10% of your gross revenue, not the end of the world. Not really that excited about it, but not the end of the world. But if it was, obviously it was a tipping point for some. If it's, 70, 80% of your gross revenue is grizzly bears, well, yeah, now it hurts, right? And now you're doing something else.
Yeah. Well, good luck, Scott. I'm fingers crossed, and it's been a. Can you talk about at all any of the supporters who's been backing you guys? Can you talk about that at all, or not really?
I would just say I'm proud of the hunting community and our partners, and so we've seen everything from people walking up and giving me $10 US at a Wild Sheep Foundation show in Reno, to different chapters and organizations contributing significant amounts of money because they just are appalled by the decision, and so are we. So we've had a bunch come from within our membership, but a bunch from just hunters, and every dollar goes into that is its own accounting, and it all goes to we call it Fight for the Hunt. And so I've had a few people challenge me that, well, the lawsuit won't get the hunt back. And I'm like, no, but it sets a pretty damn strong message that you mess with shit, someone's going to hold you to account. And that's really the message here. And one day, we're going to keep fighting, and one day we hopefully get the hunt back. But it won't be the lawsuit by itself that'll do it.
Mm-hmm. So on that note, let's talk a little bit about that hunt coming back. So there's sort of this engagement piece, so hence the importance of us all weighing in on that. We can't reiterate that enough. We're seeing now, we look at great nation like the Tahltan in the northwest corner there. They're out there, and they've got a bounty now for their members to go out and harvest grizzly bears and manage predators. And again, all under the guise of there's too many predators on the landscape and ungulates are getting decimated out there front. So we're seeing some support, I think, from First Nations for a managed hunt. And I think that, if there's any hope moving forward, it would be sort of with the support of First Nations for a hunt back in British Columbia. What are you seeing from your perspective on that, Scott?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I don't think I'm telling any tales out of school when if you understand the coastal First Nations, and their position, it's really, close the hunt, keep it closed, and don't hunt grizzly bears. I think there are 8 nations in the coastal First Nations. There's 204, I believe, in the province. And so some have different beliefs than others, but the further north you go, the more support, the more grizzly bears have interaction with different First Nations. They've lived with them longer. They understand I think whatever you want to call that, the dynamic of human conflict on the land. I think they've seen firsthand. The Tahltan certainly have seen firsthand of impacts to caribou and moose because of large predator numbers. And let's be clear, that's not only grizzly bears; it's other predators too. But earlier in the podcast, I made some mention to seeing more grizzly bears than moose. That was out of Tahltan territory, right? So. It's reckless to, who in rush hour traffic would, blindfold themselves and take their, hand off the wheel, right? Reckless. Mm-hmm. And I would think that'd be the same if you pick species and call them iconic and then don't manage them and let them be wherever and do whatever. I don't think that's good for the species, and I don't think that's good for the other species, right? There are causes, there's impacts to that decision that you make. And so 100%, I think that there's a lot of nations in the north that believe that there should be a hunt, believe that their sustenance hunt themselves is not enough. So let's be clear here. First Nations have constitutional rights to hunt grizzly bears for food, social, and ceremonial reasons. And then the Tahltan have that, as you mentioned, the $1,000 bounty per grizzly bear for Tahltan people to exercise their constitutional right. But even with that, grizzly bears are tough to hunt. They're in remote places. and tough to get to. That's a challenge. So they're looking for help, and those nations that see too many bears and impact to other species that they are concerned about. So I'd say specifically caribou, but also moose and elk. I think you're going to see them continue to press the province for some kind of hunt, and where we are with the United Nations so I'm trying to say UNDRIP
declaration.
Thanks. That's where we are. We've got an act now that supports UNDRIP, and I think that Indigenous peoples have an incredible amount of power. I think globally as well as specifically in British Columbia. But the UN declaration really is brought home here, and I think that in the future, if there's a hunt, it'll be with those nations that want hunting to happen. And there's many that do, and many that are pushing for it. So I think the province is in between a rock and a hard place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they manage this. So, all right, you got a hunt story for me, or what? Do you have a sheep hunting story? Do you have any sheep hunting stories?
So while I'm a life member of the Wild Sheep Society and the Wild Sheep Foundation, I'm still a less than oneer, and my only non-hunting sheep story. I'm in OK Falls. I'm in the bluffs. I don't know if you know that area or not, but I'm in the bluffs behind OK Falls, and there's this really wise old mule deer buck that I'm trying to close the deal on, and I'm on top of this bluff as it's just coming in shooting light, and I'm like, I got you now, and see some movement in the trees, and then it's more than just him. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. He's always been by himself. And then there's 2, 3, and as they clear the trees and they're into this little draw that they're coming towards me, it's like, holy shit, those are sheep. I'm like, that's a band of rams. And I'm no expert on sheep hunting, but they're like the ones you have on your stage at your event in Kamloops. And I'm like, oh, I got to get a photo of this. Well, I'm wearing a fanny pack, and my camera, no, not an iPhone or anything, but my camera's in my fanny pack. So I have to reach around as they're coming up and they're closing the distance, right? So saw them at whatever it was, 75 yards. Now they're inside 50, and zip, I pull the camera out of my fanny pack. And of course, the camera's in a little case, right? And it's Velcro. So I go rip to open it up. And now I got all these rams locked right on me at about, 40 yards. And at that time, the wind's coming up and no idea that I'm there. But now they're all paying attention. And I'm like, well, if I'm quick enough, I can get a photo. So first you have to turn the camera on, right? And what does it do? It goes, the chime goes off, ding, 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 and all these rams turn around, and I'm seeing ass and feet as I go over the hill. I'm trying to snap these photos, and I get blurry photos of like dust, and maybe you can see a couple of sheep asses, but I'm trying to show my buddy, no, really, it was a beauty. Like, this ram was huge, and he's like, yeah, right. So, anyways, that's the closest I've been to shooting a sheep. Maybe one day you and I go sheep hunting, and then I'll take you hunting somewhere else, and we'll find you a whitetail or a mule deer or something.
Right on. Well, it goes to show you that sheep hunting's easy, right? Anyone can kill them. You're not even hunting them, and you can find them. So.
Yeah, no season there, I don't think anymore. But it just, you know what? That's the thing I love about hunting is, at that particular time, you're on top of the mountain. It's you're watching basically the world come to life, right? As the sun starts to break, and you're in this big mule deer buck's backyard, and I think I got him, and I never got him. To this day, never got him. So it's just love the experiences and what you see, the wildlife, whether it's a band of rams or just the grouse you see, or the wildlife. It's just something about being out there, and I think it's good for everyone mentally. And I don't know. I think it's in your DNA. I love to hunt, and I'll be a hunter all my life.
Awesome, Scott. I appreciate it. So, for anyone that's listening, obviously, a lot of our good friends down south are familiar with the great work that you guys do because they've been up here on guided hunts, and a lot of people in BC, resident hunters as well. Give them the 2-minute pitch to why they should buy a GOABC membership and support what you guys are doing.
Well, resident hunters can't, but I mean, if you hunt, you should be a member of your local organization. So if you hunt sheep, Wild Sheep Society of BC, obviously you guys do great work. Or Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, or your local Wildlife Federation. So in British Columbia, we have the BC Wildlife Federation. I think that, join, be a part of that. These organizations do great work, great conservation work. You learn about hunting, and I think you need to do that. If you're an outfitter in BC, you should be a member of GOABC. I think that we're everywhere. I think that we're on every file. We have lots of work to do. We have lots of challenges. But I think that being a member of a local organization of what you care about is really important. If there's 110,000 hunters in BC, why isn't there 110,000 members of the Wild Sheep Society? Or of the BC Wildlife Federation, or Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. The average hunter needs to engage. Otherwise, who's doing the heavy lifting, and your activity that you care about so much may not be available in the future. And in that world, I am very scared of.
Well said, Scott. Well, appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for doing this. And we can't wait years. We got to do this again. So maybe we record at Jurassic. We've moved the Jurassic weekend just so that you can be there, so that you don't have you can't use your excuse of the family reunion this time. We'll be able to spend the weekend. We'll record a podcast on the rivers of the Fraser there.
I'd like to do that. I think you moved it because it was Trevor's birthday, but that's okay. You can say you moved it for me, but that's another great event, right? If you're not aware of the Jurassic, have a look at that. Go to, there's opportunities to buy that at different auctions, and that's just another great event. Another example, right? Of just camaraderie and collaboration and working together and raising money for conservation is fantastic. And I said this before. So Dean Work is the owner of the Great River Adventures, and he's done some Who Cares episodes for us, and I always find it interesting that some of the most negative feedback that we get are on his posts, and not because he says anything wrong. Actually, he's a pretty cool cat the way he speaks, and he looks like Sammy Hagar, which I give him tease about him quite a bit. But the people are absolutely against catch and release fishery, and there's almost no mortality. The
most sustainable activity out there.
It blows my mind.
Doesn't make sense.
No, I don't understand. So, I caught a 8-foot sturgeon with Dean, and he's telling me it was caught 4 times, and I'm like, isn't that cool? But no, some people say you tortured him 4 times, and I'm like, whatever. The thing's 100 years old. Isn't that cool? No, it's not cool. It's actually, you're warped and demented, and you torture things. And I'm like, that's not how I think. And I'm like, we're raising money for conservation. It's a great revenue generator. There's almost no footprint, right? And it was caught 4 times. And then sometimes you'll catch one that's never been caught before. And where has that sturgeon been for, 100 years? And they're catching sometimes 11, 12 footers that are, unbelievable. And I don't know, it just shows you where this world is sometimes. There are people out there that don't agree with us. So if you feel passionate about hunting and fishing and the things you do, we need to engage not only in conservation, but we need to engage politically. And if there's a message or a takeaway from this, it's Kyle. Everyone you talk to, please engage politically. And MLAs put their pants on one leg at a time. Just take a coffee, go in there, and sit down and talk to them.